Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where we're entering the first weekend of the summer movie season, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is kicking things off. It should be an amazing summer, both from a moviegoer's perspective, hopefully. Remember last summer? Didn't quite deliver. But also from a box office perspective for Hollywood. They're hoping for big numbers. And sure enough, the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 box office is starting to take shape. It's coming in a little under what was projected, so we're going to break it down, but maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised by the end of the weekend. It's still big, but it's not going to be as big as they said, which creates, it's a double-edged sword. Disney wants to make it seem like it's going to be a really big deal to make sure you go, but then, it's an art form, I guess, but that's a better thing to say than double-edged sword, because you want to project a high number, but not so high that the reality seems like a bummer, a little bit of a bummer. All right, so let me tell you how it's shaping up, and of course we'll go into this in depth on Monday in Movie Math. All right, so Guardians of the Galaxy Thursday night is looking to do 17 to 20 million. That's the third biggest Thursday night ever for the MCU, but it is significantly behind Avengers Age of Ultron, which, as you recall, they said that this was outselling in pre-sales. So that's weird. So the pre-sales are better, but in terms of, I guess, people stepping up to the box office at the actual time that the movie plays, it must be significantly lower, because it's about 10 million under what Age of Ultron brought in on Thursday night. I do wonder if the week early opening overseas with the tepid word of mouth might have been a problem. We'll see if that ends up being a factor. But this isn't bad, by the way. It's still very good, but it's just not as good as was projected. All right, so anyway, Age of Ultron's Thursday night was 27.6 and Civil War was 25. And then Guardians is coming in again at 17 to 20. This means that now the Thursday night numbers are rolled into Friday. So it looks like Friday's overall gross is probably at this, if it continues at this rate, is going to be around 60 million plus. That's compared to Ultron's Friday, which was 84.4. So that's like 20 million off Ultron's Friday. Again, even though it was said that it was tracking better in pre-sales on Fandango. So that's weird. And then Civil War's Friday was 75.5. So again, it's in third place. Considering how many MCU movies that there have been, that's certainly not bad. So right now it's shaping up not for the $160 million opening weekend that was projected, but for probably 125 to 130. Now still, if that happens, it will still pass Iron Man to become the 6th or maybe even the 5th best opening for the MCU, as Iron Man 2 sits at 128, right in the middle of that projection for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. So Robert Downey Jr.'s lock on the top grossing MCU movies is still pretty safe, because you have the first two Avengers movies as the biggest openings first, then Civil War, then Iron Man 3. And that's starting at like 174, so there's no way that Guardians of the Galaxy is going to top those. So it's really looking to see if it can get 5th or 6th place. But again, that's good. So I think it's interesting that it's not quite what Ultron was, even though that was the headline just earlier this week, but it's still very, very strong. And we'll see where it ends up by the end of the weekend. And I do feel that I think it's a double-edged, it's a 1-2 punch. We'll talk about it on Movie Math. But I think potentially the problems are the week early release overseas with, again, not, I would even say tepid word of mouth, not exuberant word of mouth, right? There might be some comic book movie fatigue. I think also a lack of tying into the MCU overall is problematic for the film. And then I do feel there's a little bit of a revenge factor from the DC community, the DCEU community. I think, some people, are like, well, if you're not going to give our movies a pass, I'm not going to give your movies a pass. And so I think you're seeing a little bit, maybe some people are like, I'll wait for the second weekend or whatever. We'll see what happens. But again, it's very good. It's just not as strong as had been anticipated. And so we'll see how the headlines develop on Monday, if that factors in at all. But in other news for Disney's box office, Pirates is tracking unusually strong. Or is it? This could be another overestimation in an effort to get momentum going in terms of people feeling they should go. But it's been projected the Pirates will open over the 4-day Memorial Day weekend with 90 to 100. That would be spectacular. That would mean that Pirates hasn't lost any ground. It wouldn't be the biggest Pirates opening of all time, but if it gets near the 100 million mark, it shows that the franchise is still very strong. So it wouldn't embarrass itself. That would be nice. It wouldn't impress, but it wouldn't embarrass either. And I think that's stronger than anybody anticipated, considering Johnny Depp's other numbers as of late. So that's very good. But again, they overestimated Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, so we'll see if Pirates actually does end up delivering that. And then also, outside of Disney, Baywatch is projected to do 45 to 50 over 5 days. It's opening Thursday to get a jump on Pirates that weekend. But that's a pretty darn good opening for an R-rated comedy that's not in 3D. So it's got, Dwayne Johnson, I often say, is box office steroids, but, the picture doesn't have any steroids as in 3D or IMAX, so they're just going on pure ticket sales, and that seems pretty solid to me. And Zac Efron could really use that as well, by the way. He's had a little bit of a rocky road as of late. Neighbors 2 did not really deliver. So that's the first story of the day. I'm curious, are you planning to see Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 this weekend? Do you have your tickets? And how do you think that it will do? All right, so the second story of the day is, this was a big headline yesterday, and it was revealed that HBO is planning 4 Game of Thrones spin-offs, or at least they're developing 4, and it's going to be the best behind-the-scenes reality show ever someday. Maybe Aaron Sorkin could write a behind-the-scenes expose, right? But they're developing 4 spin-offs simultaneously, and they're going to see how many are viable to make the leap to the small screen. So, of course, as we all know, Game of Thrones will end after 8 seasons, and a season 7 is coming up, so just 2 seasons to go. But, David Weiss and David Benioff, who are the showrunners, creators of the show, and, screenwriters, and television, screenwriters are king, and sometimes queen. But, they have said they would never do another Game of Thrones type show, like a spin-off or something, but they are going to executive produce whichever of these 4 shows makes it to HBO. And I'd say I would liken it to the Coen brothers executive producing the Fargo TV series on FX, and that turned out great. Noah Hawley's been very authentic to their original movie. I feel season 3 of Fargo is weak, which is too bad because it's Ewan McGregor's first TV show. There's just something missing from it that was present in the first 2 seasons. But anyway, I think there's maybe a crackling energy that isn't quite there. I also think Ewan McGregor, it's not a good year for accents in Ewan McGregor. I think that his French accent was all over the place in Beauty and the Beast, and I think here it's even more problematic because he has so much screen time trying to do a Minnesota accent. But anyway, they're going to executive produce, and these are the 4 writers that are developing these potential Game of Thrones spin-offs, right? And they could be sequels, prequels, or spin-offs. All right, so Max Borenstein, who's a writer over in the Kaiju cinematic universe at Legendary. He worked on Godzilla and Kong Skull Island. I feel the writing is the weakest part over there, so that gives me a little pause for concern. Jane Goldman, Matthew Vaughn's partner in crime. She's worked on Kick-Ass, Kingsman, the X-Men movies with him. She's actually collaborating with George R.R. Martin on something. Brian Helgeland, Mystic River, A Knight's Tale. He also worked, I believe, on LA Confidential. So that was his big thing with Curtis Hanson. But then ever since he's gone off on his own, I think his output is medium, so I wouldn't feel too good about that either. And then interesting, Carly Wray, who works on a lot of TV, The Leftovers, Westworld, and Mad Men, is also working with George R.R. Martin to develop a potential show. Now, I think it's really interesting that they not only have 2 women in here, but that only the women are working with George R.R. Martin. I wonder why that is. Does George R.R. Martin only want to work with women? Were the guy candidates I don't need any help? I would want George R.R. Martin working with me. I'd be like, well, George likes it, so greenlight my idea. So we'll see what we get. I think that there's such a huge cast that surely some members are willing to stay on to star in their own show, right? Probably not any of the main cast members who get so much money per episode. They're probably like, I don't want to potentially ruin my legacy. Although with the exception of Kit Harington, who movies haven't really worked out for him. I don't know if maybe he'd be able to resist the paycheck. Although we, of course, have to see who makes it. For a show infamous for killing off major characters, we have to see who makes it to the end of season 8. But if Jon Snow is still around, I can see him getting a show, perhaps. And also Arya Stark, Maisie Williams. Her movie career is not really going anywhere. I think she might be interested. And then even Sophie Turner. We don't know how Dark Phoenix is going to turn out. A lot of us are very concerned about this team continuing with the X-Men stories. So I would think that she would want to have not only the security, but I think she'd want to maybe stay in the Game of Thrones world. Although the Game of Thrones proper will still be going by the time Dark Phoenix comes out in 2018. But still, I think maybe she'd want to have the momentum of having her own show, maybe to keep her in the news, right? To maybe, because her movie career is not sturdy at all in any way. So I think she really needs Game of Thrones to prop it up. Then Gwendolyn Christie, Brienne of Tarth. I think, would be totally, maybe she and Tormund could go off and have their own show. I would watch the hell out of that. That would be amazing, assuming they both make it to the end of Game of Thrones. But neither one of them gets that much work at all, so they should have their own show for sure. Alfie Allen, maybe, is Theon Greyjoy. I could see that working out. And then another, here's my best idea, I feel. Everybody's been upset that, we never saw Lady Stoneheart come back. Mama Stark killed at the Red Wedding. Now, she was supposed to come back and wreak her revenge as Lady Stoneheart, basically like a Game of Thrones zombie, but not a White Walker, something else. And so Michelle Fairley doesn't really work that much, so maybe Lady Stoneheart could come back in her own series, right? That would be amazing. I think that'd be great. She just took a little bit longer to come back this time and has her own show. So I think those are all very viable ideas, and I think they could potentially work quite nicely. So let's see if HBO can pull this off. So that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day is a holdover from a few days ago. I managed to fit it in today. A couple of you have been asking me about this. And this is the Happytime murders, who got a significant development, or should I say savior, in Melissa McCarthy signing on to star and produce. Now, the Happytime murders, as you might recall, I've been talking about this for a while now because they've been working on it since 2008. Brian Henson, it's a passion project for him, and it's under his Henson Alternative banner. Of course, he sold the Muppets to Disney, but he can still do stuff with puppets. So his idea is to do like a really hardcore rated R Who Framed Roger Rabbit situation where humans and puppets, basically Muppets, basically coexist in a really seedy world with strippers and alcoholism. It's kind of like Avenue Q, right? So you take Who Framed Roger Rabbit meets Avenue Q, and that's actually a pretty good pitch. If I were a studio executive, I'd be like, tell me more. And speaking of studio executives, the studio executives at Styx liked what they heard, and they signed on in 2015 to distribute. But it's still in development because they don't have any good talent attached. Well, now that's changed, as Melissa McCarthy and her husband, who also works with her, they produce movies together, Ben Falcone, have signed on. Now, I have to say, their personal output is medium. I think Melissa McCarthy's best work has been with Paul Feig, although I'm sure they've probably let's stay apart for a while after the debacle that was Ghostbusters. I thought Ghostbusters was pretty good. It wasn't as good as it needed to be, but it had a lot of problems, I think, that it just couldn't overcome from an overall wider discussion situation, making it all women, a little bit too girl power, not as funny as it needed to be. It was no Spy. I love Spy. I think that's Melissa McCarthy's best movie to date. But speaking of Spy, I think that one of the reasons that Spy worked so well is it had such strong male co-stars in Jude Law and Jason Statham. So I hope Melissa McCarthy doesn't think she can go it herself here with just her and the puppets. I think she's going to need another strong male presence to really balance this out and not make it seem now, Melissa McCarthy can never be C-level, but we don't want a B-level movie, right? The Boss. The Boss was not bad, I thought, but it certainly wasn't Spy level good, or what this would need to be to succeed. So the storyline is that all these puppets who worked on the Happytime show, right, are being killed. That's why it's called the Happytime murders. So a former puppet detective teams up with his former partner, which I guess will now be a woman, Melissa McCarthy from the LAPD, to see what's going on and investigate. And I have to say, sometimes Melissa McCarthy just, does a lot of screaming. That's when I like her the least. Like The Heat. Oh, I did not like The Heat. Did pretty well, though, so I'm apparently in the minority there. But I don't know how to see her just screaming at puppets for an hour and a half. That would not be good. This has to be really clever. So I hope this works out. Melissa McCarthy and Ben Falcone, I'm glad they have a lot of faith in this. And I think it's a potentially very good matching of star and material. But I would bring in another writer. I would think that it would be unfortunate if Melissa McCarthy and Ben Falcone thought they could do this themselves with Brian Henson. I don't have a lot of faith in that creative team all on their own. They need another person to come in there. But what do you think? Do you think you would see this movie? What do you think of Melissa McCarthy? Do you think she's a good choice? And do you think that these three people, Melissa McCarthy, Ben Falcone, and Brian Henson, are enough? Or do you agree with me that they need a really strong comedic writer to come in here and help them out? All right, so those are the three stories of the day. And speaking of writers, I have the perfect viewer question. This is a great one because I think a lot of people sometimes don't understand the realities of the business. So this comes from May Van, and this is great. So May says, Grace, I have a quick question about screenwriters. Fabulous. You talk a lot about writers being hired onto projects, so I was curious about how much creative control they have over their work. Does the director or producer tell them what they want to happen in the movie and the writer simply writes the dialogue to make it happen, or do they get to have some say on how the story plays out? I understand writers on the blacklist will have made the whole story, but what about the ones working on those big blockbusters? Do writers on Marvel movies just have to connect the dots between Kevin Feige's master plan? I'm really curious, and I'd love to hear back from you. Love your show and value your input. God bless. Heart. Aw, May, that's the nicest question. You asked so nicely. All right, so it's a great question, too. So if you're a screenwriter, there are two ways you can go about getting work in the film industry. We're not talking about TV. So in the film industry, you can do two things. One, you can write an original script all on your own. It's called a spec script. It's not for hire. No one's paid you to do it. You're writing it on the hope that someone will buy it once they read it. So you write the whole thing, and maybe someday it'll get on the blacklist, which is, again, the list of fabulous scripts that have not been made. And sometimes, as we've said, you can see they're not made for a reason when it actually does get made. But anyway, it's called a spec script, and anyone who's a serious screenwriter has to have 3 spec scripts available to show to people to show the quality of their work. And sometimes they're like, oh, I liked this one so much, I'll buy it. But you have to have spec scripts so people see that you can write a script, and it can't all be the same. You should show range. You want to write a small indie film, maybe you want to watch a mid-range budget movie. Don't write a big blockbuster, because that's just going to make you look bad, because you would never write an original blockbuster. So you want to write something that's like Terminator, like a low-budget, high-concept idea that could turn into a big franchise, right? And then also you want to write something maybe that's like a little bit different than what else you wrote, like a rom-com or a comedy. You want to show that you can do maybe some different genres. So that should be what you have available if somebody potentially wants to hire you. So anyway, of those original scripts, the spec scripts, they can be purchased outright. Someone says, "Oh, I really like this," but at the same time, once they purchase it, it's that producers or studios. Well, the producers working for the studio. So then it can therefore be rewritten, sometimes by you. They can be like, I love this, I'm buying it, I want you to rewrite it for me. Or they're like, thank you so much. They leave, take your script with them, and hand it to someone else to rewrite. Nothing you can do about it. All sales are final, right? You made your money, you go on, you write the next script. Never become too attached to anything when you're working in showbiz, because it's a group effort. Then next, there's the for hire gig, right? So sometimes you'll be asked to adapt something, like a book, etc. So your job there is to, the producer says, I like this book, or this book is really popular, adapt it for me. So your job is to make it cinematic, figure out how to, convey things that are, set on the page in a visual medium. That's what your job is there. So of course there you have to follow the book, because they're adapting the book because people want to see a movie version of it. You can't just go to town and change everything. So you have to be faithful to the source material. Sometimes. We have a lot of problems, and sometimes they aren't. But anyway, and then in that case, sometimes it's the writer's idea. They're like, oh, I think this would be a lot more effective. Or more often than not, the producer says, I don't think this is going to play with audiences, this part of the book, I want you to change it. And then you have to make it work. That's your job. Now, sometimes you're hired to write an idea, right? We haven't gotten to blockbusters yet, but sometimes you're hired to write an idea. So therefore and I guess this goes to blockbusters too, but we'll talk about cinematic universes in just a second. So therefore, the producer and the director, sometimes if they're already been hired, yes, they will tell you what they want. They will say, we have cast this actor, or I want you to play up this character. And, you're expected to bring stuff to the table. At no point are you supposed to just be like a writing bot, right? I mean, you're supposed to be a part of the conversation. You're the least important, okay? You have to do what they want, but you're supposed to suggest solutions to how to make things work, ideas, and then they decide whether or not they like them. So what you'll do is you'll first write an outline, because they don't want you to waste all your time writing the script until everybody's agreed on a general idea of how it's going to work out. So first you'll write an outline, and the director and producer will have to sign off on it. If they like the outline, then you'll proceed to writing the script, and you'll probably have to hand in pages chunks at a time so they can see how it's progressing. Then once you've written the first draft, there will be rewrites, either by you, or again, they might bring someone else in to rewrite you. They might be like, oh, okay, I guess this is the best you can do, or we feel we want to bring in a different voice, and they'll bring somebody else in. Or sometimes, when the director does come on, they go, well, I'm a writer, so I want to tweak the script because this is what I want to do. Or sometimes the director will say, well, I always work with this writer, like Matthew Vaughn and Jane Goldman, so they're like, I want Jane to look at it. So that's just something that's just movie making. You have to deal with it. If you don't like it, to become a director-writer. And then once the movie gets to set, the director might change things on location, the cast, the actor, Will Smith, of course, infamously rewrote Men in Black 3 on set, being like, I don't like my lines. And sometimes you're on set, Ryan Reynolds, for instance, paid for the Deadpool screenwriters to sit there, so it would work out very well out of his own pocket. The Red screenwriters, of course, have been on their sets. I interviewed them, and they talked about that. But that's rare. That's unusual. Usually, you will not be called. They'll be like, "See ya." Writers are very rarely involved in production. Then when it comes to cinematic universes, you will have to check in with the group. You'll have to check in with whoever's running it, like Feige, for instance. He will tell you, well, you need to set this up. Remember Joss Whedon's complaints about Age of Ultron? They're like, you got to set it up. And sometimes it's for the benefit of everyone involved. For instance, I feel nobody apparently told James Gunn, you have to help set up Infinity War. He didn't, and I think that's going to have some ramifications for his film's box office. And I think it was a mistake from a business perspective. I did like the movie, but I just feel it was a mistake from a business perspective. And then also sometimes there's a writer's room, right? Where everybody's like, well, what are you doing? Well, this is what I'm doing, so you got to make sure you tie into it. Because the whole idea of a cinematic universe is that it all ties in together, so therefore it has to tie in together. So your script has to tie into, you want it to. You want your movie to do well, because then people will think you're a good writer, or at least a successful writer, right? Because a lot of times Hollywood's like, well, it's subjective as to the quality of your script, but I can look at the box office numbers of it, and so I think you did a good job, right? And sometimes that's how writers keep getting work, even though you're like, you wrote crap. That's how it works. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a perspective, May, of what would be asked of you of a screenwriter in different situations. Anyone who's a screenwriter down below, or is an aspiring screenwriter, what's your thoughts on it? What's your perspective? How do you feel? If there's anything you'd like to add to how I explained it. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody, today. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories. Again, your thoughts on May's viewer question, and anything you'd like us to cover on Monday, and any questions, of course, that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.